This week we are looking at Kit K Theme F, and you'll notice on the server I've changed the titles a little bit, and that's because we've gotten really off on our weeks, and so it was easier for me just to name it by the kit. So if you get into your binder and you're trying to figure out what people are working on, go by the theme, the kit name and the theme, and that'll get you there rather than the weeks, okay? This week we're looking at graphemes for long E, and I think this is one of the really, really important ideas that Real Spelling talks about, that certainly as a former first grade teacher, I did not teach this way. Never taught a phonics program that had this sort of system of looking at letters that represent sounds. I think it's going to be something for us to get used to, but in the long run, it may really help our kids with some of the confusion that happens in spelling when we teach them that the only way to form a sound is a single letter. And that happens in kindergarten and first grade, where we say E is for egg or something, and then they're trying to apply that all the time. So this theme is kind of repeated in the next couple of weeks, just in that he's taking graphemes for long E, then he does graphemes for long A, I think, something like that. So this is a recurring idea in how you present this to kids all at once rather than in little pieces, and I'll explain that. Okay, so the first thing is, the big ideas that he presents are that whether a vowel is long or short can make a difference to the meaning of the word. We've done some work with short and long vowels already this year, but the big idea is that when we represent and when we write vowels in our words, if we don't get the right vowels or combination of vowels, it's going to change the meaning in our sentences. So that's for kids to understand. The second thing is that since spelling is mainly interested in meaning, it needs a system of indicating whether a vowel is long or short. The theme teaches that the letter E alone can represent a long phoneme, and kids are very familiar with that one. But it also teaches right out of the gate that there are also graphemes for more than one letter for long E. This is the part that, as a former first grade teacher, I would never have jumped right into this. We sort of, did digraphs in March or something like that. Even back then, it wasn't necessarily when the kids were ready, as so much as when I had scheduled, I was going to do digraph type teaching, and then I think we were maybe even calling those blends. Before it gets started, the thing to watch for kids with confusion, make sure that they have some things solid. First of all, the vowels, that they need to know the vowels, using the vowel hand as well, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. This is sort of something that you can check for. This may not be fully ingrained with them yet, but the idea that individual letters in spelling are not as important as letters that are combined together and how those letters are represented. One of the things that we're going to be working on is for kids to look at digraphs, I guess those would be graphemes, not as two letters, but as a single thing that does a job. It'll help with spelling if they see them as parts together. And some of the work that teachers do with handwriting with suffixes and prefixes could also be done with these digraphs. We know how to put two E's together in handwriting. We know they naturally go together often. EA go together, EY go together, those things. Which brings us to the meaning of a digraph, is that it's a string of two letters that represent a single unit of the spelling system. So graphemes represent phonemes. So there can be more than one letter, but it represents a single sound. Yep, and that's where the kids get all confused, because they want the sound to be represented by the one letter we originally told them represented that sound. So this, I'm just going to unveil like a big chart, but really the studying of spelling is about developing a way of thinking. So what I'm about to show you is not that we want kids to know all of this in first grade, then for the rest of their lives. This is the beginning of their thinking about how words work with long E. Okay, so let me just show you this. Okay. Like I said, when I, back in the day, taught first grade, and whether I was using a phonics program or not, it was kind of how I was taught. I started with E alone, and then eventually we got into these other versions. But what often happened for kids is they would get to a word that had a digraph in it, and they wouldn't know what to do with it, and I hadn't taught it yet. So this whole theme looks at all of these as being ways to represent the long E sound. Okay? Now I've taken Melvin's writing, he sort of previewed each one of these, and what I did was I tried to imagine how I could do this with big kids and with little kids. And for big kids that can already read at this point, they're going to recognize it pretty much right away, but they're still not necessarily using it in their spelling. It's going on a hunt and figuring out some patterns. Unfortunately, we can't say things like double E is always at the beginning of a word. You know, we can't use those as rules that help us spell, but we can come up with some things that we notice. And if we send kids on word hunts to find long E's in words and look at how they're formed, they can come up with some conclusions. So I've done this as if I was either having kids come up with them or if I was presenting this to little kids. So the first thing is that there are 7 ways to represent long E in English words. Very different than when we tell kids that there's the one way. This is going to make an impact on when they approach words. So they are the E by itself, double E, EA, IE, EI, EY, and Y by itself. Okay? And again, what we want kids to think is that this isn't E and E, it's like EE. It's one representation. Yeah, if they go together. So this is another way to do that. The list that I have here, Melvin provided. Every now and then I added one in order to help it show all the phases. And I thought I had this copy, but he has a chart at the back of the theme that I know we've looked at before. It's this one right here. This one right here, where it's the other big idea is where the E comes in the word helps us understand what our combinations, what our options are. So from this chart you can see, for instance, EY does not make the long E sound at the beginning of a word. It's not an option. So kids start to understand that if they're about to spell a word that has a long E sound, they can start to say, well, where can I'm at the end of my word, what are my options out of all of these? Where can they go? So this is also sort of put up here because one of the things I have kids, they look at, notice and recognize things, that the IE, for instance, is found in the medial and the final position of words. So it's not found at the beginning either. And if we did this in an inquiry way, we could give them a set of words or ask them to go find words and identify where these things are happening. The other thing that I noticed just looking at IE was that many of these are followed by an F or a CE. Not all, but many. That may also help me say, as I'm about to spell a word and I'm saying it to myself, I know how to pronounce it because oral language precedes spelling. And if I know this, then I might try an IE. So I'm just going to quickly go through these, but it's a little bit overwhelming when you look at it at one go. But if you imagine constructing it with kids, I think it'd have a lot of meaning and then be something you could keep up for them. So to start with an E, we notice that it can be found in the initial, medial, and final positions, but the final position can only be if the word is a monosyllable. So if it has more than one syllable in the word, the single E by itself, is not going to be in the final position. Okay? For the double E, digraph, it can also be in all 3 positions, initial, medial, and final. Eel, double EL, was the only one I could find in the initial position. Another great thing for kids to, what was it?
Eerie.
Eerie, oh good, okay, yeah. Another good thing for kids to go find and locate. Because if they know that there's only a couple times that it's going to be there, then they can put that at the back of their head. They don't have to use it as a first choice. The EE and the EA are often used to represent the homophone differences with C and C. Yep. Reed and REED, the reed, the plant. So that's something to know, that if you know the homophone, then that will help you spell. EE, and this is where I put a question for myself, but I know I've read this somewhere and I didn't have time to find it. I'm pretty sure that EE can only make the long E sound, whereas EA can also make an A sound, right? So that's another way for kids to determine which one they need. Moving into EA, it can also be used in all 3 positions, and again with homophones. One of the ways to tell which one you need is to link it to relatives. So if they know that, and I wish I had my example up here, there was a word where I wasn't sure was it an EA or an EE. I found a relative word that would make sense, and by the use they had chosen, it helped me remember which one to use. So linking the spelling to relatives. IE is found in medial and final, as I said. and I noticed the F in CE. One of the things we don't want to teach kids anymore because it doesn't work is the I before you accept after C rule. It doesn't work enough for us to hang our hat on it at all. You can disprove it just about as many times as you can find it working. So instead, letting them know that it is one way, but maybe the position of the words, and that often it is used and then followed by an F or a CE. EI, these were the two words that Melvin felt were even necessary for kids to know. And as you can see, it doesn't happen very often. So this should not be a combination that kids try out first. This is going to happen much more frequently to represent E than EI. Okay? It's only in the medial position as well. And using this was the example, using the relatives, how can I tell if receive is EI or IE? It comes from the word reception. They're related in meaning, and I wouldn't spell, that is spelled with the E first. EY can only be found in the final position of base words. It's rare, he said, for it to represent long E. And kids sometimes think that EY is a suffix, but it's not. It is there to represent E. So that's another thing that they may have discovered something and you can help them understand that it's not a suffix. Y in the final position can represent long I only in the final position. And I'm not sure how you do this, but I'm sure there's a way to tell whether it's a Y or an EY, something with our Y rule, okay? The other thing here, and I know there's a word for this, but I can't think of it, but it's sort of like a describing word, right? Ice to icy, I'm telling about how it is. So that's another thing that may contribute to the use of the Y as the final E sound in a word.
So when they're adjectives.
Right, that's what I was thinking. So maybe that is a reason to be using it instead of like a single E at the end. Okay.
Yeah, because every adjective I can think of has the E sound.
Yeah.
Y,
So, like I said, I think that if we can introduce these to kids and give them the options and some reasons why you might pick one over the other, then some of the spellings that we give them, some of the spellings that we see will start to make more sense. Instead of them trying to spell with only this as their first option and having no rhyme or reason for picking any of the others. It'll also, of course, help with decoding and reading. Because if you're getting some familiarity with these digraphs that represent the long E sound, then when you encounter them in your textbook, when you're reading, you'll try an E sound with a long E sound if you've been taught that they can represent that.
I love this poster because then once you move off of this unit, if this was something they could refer to in the classroom, this is it's really good. I think they could look at their choices if they're stuck.
Yeah.
You know, if they're stuck on a spelling.
And actually, that's why I didn't mean to put this down. I was thinking the same thing, and I was kind of thinking once I was done, especially with the older kids, making, you know how we have the alphabet chart in some grades where they're showing the different ways for that one sound. This was something I could think also that we could put up sort of under the letter E. And I just drew silly little pictures to help me represent it. But these are examples of the words where the long E is represented in all these different ways.
Can I borrow that and copy it when you're after this?
Absolutely, you can borrow any of this.
I want to do one for A. Do you have the same kind of poster made for the A?
I haven't made it, but I think I'm going to.
I really like it. In fact, I'd like to take a picture of this and
it didn't
myself.
all I did was take his words and transfer them into this as a poster, but I really feel like you could also send kids on, make them make the poster.
Absolutely.
You know, they do the work and you put it up. Yeah.
I love it. When you're past this unit, can I borrow this and this? And
absolutely.
I'm going to do a...
And the photos, you know, I've taken pictures of it, so they'll be on the server. So if you just want to look at the picture to construct it, of all of this, it's on there. Yep.
Okay, then that's all I need.
So that's it. And just getting them started with that.